Yes, y'all. It's your boy Carter, and I'm back. And forget what you heard, because now you're locked into the truth. And if you hear the wolf sounds in the background, that should indicate to you that the wolf is out, and I'm on the prowl. And if you're looking for that watered down jive talk, you in the wrong spot. But if you want the unadulterated truth, no filter, stay locked in. Here we go. So today I want to answer a question that's been long standing. And the question is Dana White and the UFC racist, or are they just biased? And I know it's so easy to throw the term racist out there before we look at all the facts. And some will just totally dismiss it, while others say, hey, look at the track record. It's undeniable. Now, coming off the heels of UFC 209, where Tyron Woodley defended the welterweight title against Stephen Thompson. And after the fight, UFC President Dana White was open and frank with his opinion on the fight. He stated in a post-fight interview that he believes Stephen Thompson won the fight 3-2. Now, as I mentioned in the earlier video, I said that the UFC and Dana White wanted Stephen Thompson to win this fight and win the welterweight title so he could become the face of the welterweight division. I mentioned how the UFC was now catering its product to the casual fan, and that Stephen Thompson had the clean-cut look that will be attractive to the casual fan. And if you've ever noticed, prior to Bruce Buffer announcing the winner to any title fight, Dana White would directly position himself behind the definitive or the probable winner. And despite Tyron Woodley being the reigning and defending champion, Dana White positioned himself behind Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. And as I mentioned previously, Dana White and the UFC wanted Stephen Wonderboy Thompson to win this fight. Now, does that have anything to do with Tyron Woodley being a black fighter? I think this is very possible. But I think it's something that's driven by marketing and money versus prejudice. And though I think money is the primary source of Dana White's biasness toward fighters, the way he's so open with it and the way he handles situations comes off as extreme prejudice and makes it hard to argue my position. I want to talk about a situation that I believe that Dana White and the UFC handled very poorly, that gave those that favored the theory of racism existing in the UFC a solid damn argument. So at UFC 200, Daniel Cormier was scheduled to defend the light heavyweight championship against Jon Jones. In less than 24 hours before the event, the fight was canceled because Jon Jones was found to have been in violation of USADA's drug policy. But also at UFC 200 was the return of Brock Lesnar, who returned to the octagon to defeat Mark Hunt in a unanimous decision. But after the event, it was later announced that Brock Lesnar was using performance enhancers. This led to Mark Hunt filing a lawsuit against the UFC because Brock Lesnar made millions upon millions of dollars for his appearance, while Mark Hunt received scraps. Mark Hunt, who is a Samoan fighter from New Zealand, wanted the UFC to pay him half of Brock Lesnar's purse because Brock Lesnar cheated, basically. And not only did the UFC not compensate Mark Hunt, they did not remove the loss from his record either. So here's where we run into problems, fight fans. USADA tests every fighter before the fight and after the fight. So the same company that tested Jon Jones before his fight with Daniel Cormier also tested Brock Lesnar before his fight with Mark Hunt. Now, we have to understand that the UFC was in a bad position because now they had two fighters on the premier card of the year, the UFC 200 card, that both tested positive for banned substance. Now, the UFC was in a predicament because now the co-main event and the main event was in jeopardy of being canceled. And they could not cancel both of these fights on the premier card of the year, possibly this decade. So now the UFC is looking at two fighters on the two premier fights on the premier card of the decade possibly being canceled because of violations. Now, you cannot tell me that UFC did not know both of these fighters had tested positive before their fights. If you want to believe that the UFC did not find out until after the fight, you are a complete fool. Okay? You are a complete fool. Both of these fighters tested positive, and the UFC had to make a decision on which fight they were going to cut. USADA is one of the most strict testing agencies in Las Vegas. So don't sit here and tell me that Dana White and the UFC did not know, because you're lying to yourself. They did know. They had to make a decision, and they chose to cut John Jones. And they greased some pockets, and believe you me, they greased somebody's pockets in order to keep Brock Lesnar on the card, because they know that Brock Lesnar would appeal to the casual fan. And so the UFC and Dana White willfully, knowingly sent Mark Hunt into a fight with a man that they knew had cheated. And when Mark Hunt had found out that they knew he had cheated, wanted to be compensated, and they did not compensate him, yet they told him, be quiet, shut up, know your role, and be glad you're getting a paycheck. And the UFC wasn't going to pay Daniel Cormier in spite of all the hard work and training that he did in order to get to the UFC main event. Thank goodness that Anderson Silva stepped up and stepped in so Daniel could get paid, and all his hard work and training did not go in vain. So the UFC has two fighters, one white, one black, both found guilty of the same infraction. One fighter is a premier fighter, a star, a guy who's been carrying a lot of your events. Another guy is a guy who had some success in your organization, went off to do pro wrestling, and came back, probably hiring marketing dollars and also bringing in a lot more casual fans. So Brock Lesnar comes to UFC 200. He cheats. He fights. You send a Samoan fighter in there to fight him when you already know he cheated. You put this Samoan fighter's career at danger. You put his health at danger by putting him in against a man who you know willfully cheated, and yet you do not compensate him. So when the question is brought up, is there racism in the UFC? It will be hard to argue your point, UFC. Now, I clearly believe it is all based off biasness because of marketing dollars. But a casual fan who does not understand that or does not see it will only see the actions that you're doing and say, yes, there is no question, there is racism clearly in the UFC, because Dana White has mishandled so many situations. He is the president of the UFC. There is no way and no circumstance in which Dana White should be commenting on any judges or taking a position on any fight. You should make no predictions. You should always remain neutral between both fighters. And there should be a policy in place that if a fighter goes into a fight and later comes out to know that his opponent had cheated, they should be compensated fully. And Dana White, if you're going to favor fighters or be biased toward fighters, leaning toward fighters, you need to learn how to hide it more. You need to learn how to disguise it, because now a lot of your minority fighters are going to public settings, are going in interviews and saying that you are racist. And I believe that you're just biased, not prejudiced. But you are such a man's man that you don't know how to be diplomatic about what you're doing. So my advice to Dana White and the UFC is to step back, be diplomatic. Don't talk about judges. Don't take sides. Don't talk about decisions. Don't give predictions. Be diplomatic. Be centered. Be fair to all fighters so they all will work with you to create a better product. This is your boy M. Carter. Subscribe to the channel. Write your comments below. Let me know what you think. I appreciate the listen. Peace.